Bet you get a kiss.
Oh, and I have it on film. Take a bow.
I was born on December 11, 1930, in St. Luke's Hospital in San Francisco, California.
Did you grow up in San Francisco?
No, we only lived there till I was about 6 months old, and then the fog there caused me to have asthma, so we moved to Redwood City, which is just about 30 miles farther south from San Francisco.
And did you grow up there?
I lived there until I was 12. Both my mother and father had lived all their lives in the city, and they always dreamed of moving to the country. So when I was 12, we moved to Lake County and subleased a little ranch there, and so that's where we lived for a few more years.
Well, before we get to that part, let's find out a little bit about when you were in Redwood City. So what was it like growing up in that town till you were 12? Was it a nice place to live?
Yes, I thought it was a nice place. We lived in several different houses at different times, and it was a small town.
Which house was your favorite?
Probably the last one, because the others we had rented. And then when I was 10, we had a house built, and it was just a block from the church and school that I attended, and so it was just nice to be able to walk up to the hill to the school and home for lunch. And before that, I would walk for a mile to and from schools.
And did you have brothers and sisters?
I had one brother. Actually, he was my half-brother, but my mother was the only mother he remembered, and
so he was an older brother.
An older brother.
How much older?
3.5 years older.
Okay. And what was his name?
Wesley.
Wesley.
And my father was also Wesley. My father was Wesley Earl Landstrom. My brother was Wesley Carl Landstrom.
And what was your dad like?
He was very kind and gentle, but also very organized, a good businessman. In fact, when my parents married, he had a job in a necktie factory in San Francisco, but that was then the Depression hit pretty hard, and he was let go, and there were no jobs available, so he started selling things house to house. My mother would bake pies and cookies, and he would buy eggs in great big cases, put them in dozen cartons. Honey, he would buy in 5-gallon cans, put those in jars, and he would go around from house to house selling these things. He made his own business. He went door to door. He had kind of a wicker basket with a handle and these different products in it, went door to door in the residential area of Redwood City, and people there would give him clothes that their children had outgrown and toys that their children didn't play with anymore. He was a very sociable person. He was a people person. So many times my husband has said, now if your dad was here, he would know all about those people, because he was a people person.
Now, where did his family come from?
His parents both were born in Sweden. They came to San Francisco as teenagers. They met and married in San Francisco, and that's where they lived at the time of the 1906 earthquake and fire. That's where they were living.
So they were there during that. Wow.
My father has told me many times stories. Their house was made unlivable, so they had to leave right after the earthquake. My grandmother was a great cook and baker and all, And my father's favorite thing was bread pudding. Well, just before the fire, an earthquake, she had made a big dishpan full of bread pudding because there were 5 children in the family. My dad was the youngest. Well, after the earthquake, they had to leave, and all they could take with them was what they could take in a little red wagon. And my dad said, "You mean we can't take the red bread pudding?" And his mother said, "No, but you can eat all you want." So for once in his life, he got to eat all the bread pudding that he wanted.
Oh my gosh. How old was he when that happened?
He was 7. It was kind of an adventure in a way, except they couldn't take very much. I don't know just where they were sent to a refugee camp at first, but then they were sent to Sausalito, which is right across the bay from San Francisco. I can remember we would go to San Francisco, and sometimes we would take our car, and sometimes we would park our car and go across on the ferry, because the Golden Gate Bridge was just being built at that time.
Wow.
It was not finished yet. And so many times on a Sunday we would go over and visit my grandparents. They lived in a 2-story house just a few blocks from the waterfront, and I can remember upstairs there was a big window seat, and I would sit there and watch the boats going back and forth across the San Francisco Bay.
Oh, that's lovely.
And that was
So did you get to do that a lot? Did you get to visit them a lot?
We did quite a bit until I was 7.
Now this is your dad's parents?
That's my father's parents. And when I was 7, my grandmother passed away. And so then the house was sold.
Yeah.
And my grandfather would stay with the different
Yeah, there were
sons.
5 kids, so he kind of
There
made
were
the
5,
rounds.
although there was one girl, 4 boys and 1 girl, and she died in the flu epidemic when she was 21. My father was the youngest. His sister was just 2 years older than he, so he was very close to her. He went into the army in the First World War, was sent over to France after his training. Well, shortly after he got to France, the armistice was signed. I have some of his diaries that I've read.
Wow.
Because he was a person who kept track of everything, and so he kept a diary all his life. He was disappointed because he had done all this training, you know, a young fella, and then get over to France, and then the armistice was signed and he didn't get to do any
Little
fighting.
did he know how much he actually got spared on that.
Right.
I had a note here about Grandpa Landstrom's friend in France that he communicated with.
You know, Mama Beaujolais or something like that. She was a French lady that befriended some of the soldiers over there, the American soldiers. And so Grandpa was one of those soldiers because he was over there in World War I. He never did do any fighting. His brother Irving did do some fighting and in fact was shell-shocked over there, but
You remember what a wreck he was, don't you?
I do.
So what does shell-shocked mean?
Just
It
a
is.
nervous wreck. Just
Yeah, my Uncle Irving he was always nervous.
Did he get physically injured, or was he just really scared from all the shooting and fighting going
the
on?
concussions from the shells. What a big, like an 88 millimeter comes over and lands close to you. You're automatic. You just feel like your eardrums are gonna break.
Oh, okay.
But my dad, well, he was young and adventuresome, and he had trained to go over and fight, and so he was kind of disappointed that after all that training, he didn't get a chance to fight. I still have some postcards that he got from Mama Forgeray that befriended him over there.
Okay, so she corresponded with him for several years afterwards then.
Right. He was sent home, and I think it was shortly after that he got the word that his sister was very ill and she passed away. And she was a beautiful woman. We have pictures. In fact, I was just reading in the Reader's Digest about flu and how to stay away from it and prevent it. And they said that at that epidemic, there were many big cities, and it mentioned San Francisco was one of them.
You're now living in Redwood City, and you went to school there, right? Elementary school, grade school, and so forth?
I went to a parochial school, a Seventh Adventist school. It was a very small school. It was just one room behind the church. In fact, all of my grade school was just a one-room school.
Wow. What was that like? Did you like that?
I did.
Why did you like it?
In fact, well, when I first started school, my mother was the teacher.
Oh my God.
Because she was had training in elementary education, and it seemed like at the last minute the teacher that had been hired for some reason couldn't come, and so they asked my mother to teach, and so she did teach. Now, I didn't enjoy that too much.
That's what I'm thinking. Most kids wouldn't like their mother being the teacher.
But, you know, she was my teacher, and, and
She
so,
always knew what homework you had, didn't she?
So,
Were you a good student?
yes, I enjoyed school, and I went to that school through 7th grade, and then when we moved up to Lake County, again, it was a church school, and at first there were just two of us, and my mother was the teacher again. And then before the school year was over, some other families moved in. But my mother taught me, and so in the 8th grade also. My mother's name was Edna Cornelia D. Blaker, and she was from Patterson, New Jersey, right across the river from New York City. And that's where she was born and grew up.
What brought her to California?
My dad.
Okay, so she met your dad.
Well, that's kind of a long story. When my dad was working in the necktie factory, in those days, the neckties were made with silk. Well, Patterson, New Jersey at that time had lots of silk factories. In fact, my grandfather worked in a silk factory. Well, one day when my dad opened a package of silk to make neckties, there was a girl's name and address on the paper that the silk was wrapped in. So, you know, being a young man, he decided to correspond with her. This was not my mother.
Or was she trying to find
I think
somebody?
she was looking for.
Okay, so it was like a message in a bottle, only it was in a box. Okay.
So they corresponded, and then my dad went back and he married her and brought her out to California. Well, not too long after they came back to San Francisco, she got pregnant and with my brother, and then after he was born, I guess, whether it was tuberculosis, it could have been anyway, she became ill.
Oh, that's too bad.
So when he was 5 months old, she passed away. She wanted to die at home, so my father took her and of course the baby back to New Jersey, because that was her home in Patterson. Her name was Mildred Barber, and she passed away. Well, then my father couldn't take care of a 5-month-old baby, so he left him there with his maternal grandmother and came back to San Francisco to work. But when my brother was about 2, you know, the terrible 2s,
Yeah.
just, you've got to come back and do something. He's getting too much for me. So my dad went back there and went to the church, the same church that she had attended, and my mother had known Mildred.
Oh, yeah.
And so my dad went there and met my mother, and so then they got married and he brought her out to California.
So with a 2-year-old, she starts a new marriage and a new city. And when were you born?
I was born a year later.
Now, as a mother, what was she like?
My mother, she was very strict. She was a disciplinarian, but she also taught me many good things. She was a good mother. My mother had the education. She had her teaching credential, but actually she didn't get her degree until from San Francisco State after I was grown. But and my dad, when he went to only as far as the 9th grade, and then it seemed like he was wasting his time. He said they just kind of fooled around. So he quit school and went to work after the 9th grade. There was no law in those days.
Yeah, that was very common, wasn't it?
But we always said, both my mother and I, that my dad knew much more than we did because he was a self-educated person. He could look at a column of figures and just go right down and add them up. He didn't need a calculator, anything. He was a very brilliant man, even though he hadn't been to college or even finished high school, but he didn't seem to need that.
Yeah. When you all moved to Redwood City, he took a job there.
He made his own job first. Then for a while he took a job doing delivery for what was Loma Linda Foods, it was called.
Okay.
There weren't supermarkets in those days, they were just little markets. So any specialty foods like that were sold at health food stores. So when my dad would go to these different health food stores from San Francisco down to San Jose mostly, the people would say, well, we wish you'd get this for us, or we wish you'd get that for us. Well, Loma Linda Foods wouldn't allow him to do anything but sell their things. So then he started his own business, which became W.E. Landstrom Company, selling different kinds of what we called health foods, but they were just like different kinds of teas, herbal teas. He was a very intelligent man, even though he didn't have a college education at all. He had that business until when we moved to Lake County. He had a brother, an older brother in San Francisco, who was a businessman. My dad didn't want to make the business too big. He did have a partner, but it was just kind of a family thing, something that we could handle. In fact, when I was 11 years old, he had me doing his book work for him and things like that. And I would help him put up orders of people, would order things. We had the warehouse in the basement of our home, and so after school I would work in the business too. And so when we moved to the country, he sold the business to his brother, Lloyd. Well, Lloyd was a big businessman. He liked to do things big, so he expanded it. He dropped the W.E., it just became the Landstrom Company. And he had it all up and down the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, California.
And back to doing things hands-on, tell me about making puffed wheat.
When my dad was making his own living, before he even started driving for Loma Linda, one of the things that he made was puffed wheat. And he had to stop because the neighbors complained because it made too much noise, because
how do you make
a machine that made it explode.
Oh, is that what it did?
That's the way he did it, and it was too noisy. And we lived in a residential area, so he had to stop. But I still have, and my children remember seeing them, labels that he had for the packages of puffed wheat that we used for scratch paper for years.
And what about your father being a streetcar conductor?
That was in San Francisco before he ever married.
So was that before he was doing the necktie?
Right.
So is he
That was
before that?
before he worked in that factory. That was when he quit high school. Then he went to work, and that was one of the jobs he had.
That must have been fun. Well, of course, sounds fun. I'm sure it was a lot of work, but to be a conductor, how beautiful to ride the streetcars.
Oh yes, he sounded like he enjoyed that, and I really don't know why he stopped that and went to work in the necktie factory. I don't remember those details, but I know he told about. In fact, I've even got a little notebook that has some of the schedules of the streetcars.
Oh, the schedule. And tell me, you had a funny story about your dad, about the Swedish.
Oh, after my grandmother passed away, my grandfather, first he went and stayed with my Uncle Harry, the oldest brother. Well, after he stayed with him for, I don't remember just how long, but then he came and lived with us for a while. And I was about 8 years old when he came and lived with us. And I always wondered why my dad never learned any Swedish. And he said, no, his parents wouldn't teach him Swedish. They said, we're in America now, we're going to talk English. But my grandfather did teach me one phrase in Swedish, and that was, jag vill ha kaffe, kagen and smackpål. And Linda knows that. It means something that you'll have cake and coffee. You'll have coffee and cake with butter on it.
But you knew that.
So
you
it
had
isn't
one
a
line.
very useful phrase, but that's all.
But you know what's kind of fun is to think where you got that from, your grandfather. So that's still
Right.
with you, you know. So that's
And
cool.
my grandfather, we lived a few blocks from the park, and he'd walk to the park with us. And
So you have nice memories of that then. With
so
your
I do.
Uh-huh.
Then after he stayed with us for a while, and I don't remember just how long because we were really kind of crowded. My brother, I remember, had to move out of his bedroom and sleep in the hall because of
Oh yeah.
But then he was supposed to go to live with my Uncle Lloyd, but my Uncle Lloyd already had his mother-in-law with him, so he didn't really want him, so they put him in what we called in those days, an old folks home.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't live too long after that, he died.
So this is the story of how we are related to Zachary Taylor.
Well, that picture is my great-grandfather, Richard Taylor. That was my mother's grandfather. He became blind when he was quite young. My mother remembers leading him around when she was just a teenager. I saw him one time when I was 10 years old, and we went back to New Jersey where he lived, and he immediately felt my face, and very gently with his hands, and then he said, "Oh, you don't look just like I thought you would, but almost like I thought you would look," because his way of seeing was with his hands. But his mother's maiden name was Taylor, but his father died in the war, and I'm not sure which war it would have been. It would have been maybe the Civil War, when he was very small when his father died. So his mother took her maiden name, and the name he always went by was Taylor. My grandmother was a Taylor before she married my grandfather. So back there somewhere, we're related to Zachary Taylor. I don't know how many greats.
Now, when your dad, so when he moved and they were looking for land and so forth, you were 12. What was that like to be a 12-year-old moving from your friends and community to this new place?
Well, he subleased a place there in Lake County, so it had a house and an orchard, and he bought a cow. He had never milked a cow in his life, being in the city,
Yeah.
but he learned to milk. My mother and I never did, and my mother then got a job. She started teaching in the public school there in that area, and she taught, well, mostly first and second grades, sometimes third or fourth, lower grades, but she taught there for many years. When I was in college, she was teaching there. I liked living in the country. I remember when we first moved there were, I think, about 10 sheep on the property. So I remembered reading stories about, taking care of sheep. So I thought, oh, this is great, I'll take care of these sheep. Well, after about 2 weeks of the sheep every night getting out and getting into the neighbors' yards and all, we decided that we didn't need sheep, so we sold the sheep. This is what my dad did then, was to start raising chickens. After I graduated from the 8th grade, then I went away to a boarding school, so I wasn't home.
Oh, okay. Where was the boarding school?
It was at Angwin, California, which was about an hour away in Napa County, which is the county next to Lake County, south of.
What was that like being away from home? You're still pretty young.
It was, but there weren't a lot of young people my age.
Okay. So it was nice then.
So I enjoyed it. And the first 2 years I was away, I lived in a home with a family, because it was a boarding school that was connected with a college. So they wouldn't let anyone my age be in the dorm, and so I stayed in a home.
What was the name of the school?
It was Pacific Union College is the school, and I also attended college there. And so I enjoyed being there because I had
Friends.
more friends.
Yeah, because it's a more social situation.
I was going to mention the school in Redwood City was a small school, but I still have friends from that school.
From that one room
fact,
school?
There's one who lives here in Placerville who I went to grade school with.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
So I've known him longer than his wife has. And it's kind of nice because he'll mention things, a lot of the people from my background are gone now. But Warren will mention, oh, remember so-and-so? And in fact, he and my brother and I all took music lessons from the same music teacher. And he and my brother played violin and I played piano, so I always got the accompaniments to their violin pieces.
Right.
So they got the melody and I got the accompaniment.
That's not fair.
And then friends that I knew from high school and college, I still correspond with some at Christmas time.
Now, when you went to college, what did you major in?
I majored in elementary education. I minored in home economics. And I went to college for 2 years. And, there wasn't a lot of money in the chicken business. And, well, I guess teaching school didn't pay a lot either. So after 2 years, the area where I was, they said, if you teach for us, we'll pay for you to go to summer school. So I did that for 2 years. I taught for 2 years and went to summer school in between. So those 3 summer schools gave me my 3rd year of college. And then I went back and finished college. So I took my college in 3 years and 3 summers.
Mm-hmm.
So I graduated a year later than I would have if I had gone straight through. But by that time I was 22, I had finished college and I had taught school for 2 years.
So I also, let's see, you taught school in Nice. Is it pronounced Nice or Nice? It says you taught.
Nice.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay.
Yes, I was 19 when I started teaching school, and I lived at Nice, and it was called the Westlake School, which was a couple miles away.
So you were an experienced person at age 22 and ready for the job market, I think. Were you able to get a
Right,
job?
'cause I knew that I
Yeah.
enjoyed teaching, because I had one friend that she took college in 5 years, and she took elementary education, went out to teach, and hated it. And I always enjoyed teaching the children and interacting with them. In fact, just a few months ago, a man who I didn't remember, and he came to me and he said, "Oh, you were my first grade teacher. You taught me to read."
How lovely.
And, you know, that was 56, 57 years ago.
Yeah, that's lovely. Isn't that nice, all the little ripples in the pond you made by
Right.
doing that?
My mother was a teacher. Her older sister was a teacher. So maybe it just kind of,
Yeah, and having her as a teacher, that was probably good role modeling for you just to understand.
I suppose.
Yeah.
But for a while I wasn't sure whether I wanted to be nurse or teacher, but somehow nursing didn't appeal to me. Teaching I just enjoyed it.
And how long did you do that?
Well, here in California, I just did it for 3 years, because after my third year, the year I taught after I graduated from college, was here in Placerville. And the second week of school, one of my second graders came to me and said, "I want you to be my mama."
Oh.
Well, you know, they didn't teach us in college how to handle that situation.
That's true. I bet you were kind of speechless on that one, weren't you?
Right. My car was a
47 Plymouth.
47. And where'd you get your car? How did you get a car?
My folks gave it to me for a college graduation present. What I wanted was a club coupe, which is like the one that Daddy's been fixing up.
I got one for you, but you won't drive it.
Now he says I can have that one, but I don't want that one now. But that's what I wanted. But my folks went to a agency there at Lower Lake and bought this, which used, of course, to me. Actually, they gave it to me before I graduated from college, because I did have it up there at the college for a while. Then I had it when I came over here to teach school, so I used it that year and had it when we got married. It was when Freddie was a baby that it quit on us, wasn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
So you took that down to Mexico?
As far as Guadalajara, I
That
guess.
was before he was born, wasn't it?
Right.
I
Wow.
remember we went to Carson City and we blew a tire out and everything was closed. So I went behind one of those service stations, found an old one, and that took us clear down to Guadalajara and back.
So who taught you how to drive?
My dad,
Was that
when I
hard?
was 17.
Was that challenging for both of you?
Yeah. Because he taught me around Lower Lake where we lived. We had to go to Lakeport for me to get my driver's license, take my driving test and all. That's at the other end of the lake. And I passed and got my license, but my dad said, "Well, I'm glad you passed. I wouldn't have given you a license." He was the one that taught me. I was 17 then.
Okay.
And my mother, well, the whole time we lived in Redwood City, she never had a driver's license. She didn't learn to drive until we moved up to Clear Lake. And then we lived about 3 miles out of town, and she was teaching school, and she had to get a driver's license in order to drive into school. But I remember I used to tell her, "Well, I'm going to teach you how to drive. I'll get my driver's license first, but she got hers a few years before I got mine.
Okay.
Well, let's back up a second. You're still a child. What kind of kid were you? Were you well behaved, or did you get into mischief?
Well, I guess I was sort of well behaved. I mean, I wanted to please my parents, but I think my brother was the kind that had kind of a hard time, and sometimes I know I would do things and my brother would get blamed for it.
Okay.
So, you know, I wasn't really
You
an
weren't
angel.
perfect, yeah, right.
We were good friends.
Oh, that's good.
Later.
That's nice.
Right.
Was there ever a time that you actually got in trouble? Got into mischief where you got caught?
The only time I remember my dad ever punishing me was, I don't know what happened. Of course, in those days, there were no seat belts in cars, and my brother and I were in the back seat. We were squabbling over something, and I had no idea what. But somehow I kicked him in the nose and gave him a bloody nose.
Kicked him in the nose? That was a brawl going on back there.
And that was the one time I remember my dad spanking me. Other than that, it was always my mother who did the punishing. And my mother, she kept a switch up on the warming oven of the stove. And we knew, my brother and I, that she would use it if we needed it. And there were times when I needed it. I knew that I was naughty and I needed it. So. My dad would get these cans of honey, and evidently sometimes it needed to be strained. So they told me the story of when I was 2 or 3. They had put it upstairs. I guess they thought I wouldn't find it, but I discovered it. And when they discovered me, I had honey all over myself. I was taking a bath in the honey.
Adding a new meaning to being a sweetheart, right?
One thing more about when we lived in Redwood City was a day that was still very sharp in my mind was December 7, 1941. And it was a Sunday, and I remember we heard on the news, of course just radio in those days, that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. Well, you know, I guess I knew where Pearl Harbor was, but somehow I was wondering if they were going to bomb us next, because, you know, we didn't know what was going to happen. And after that, since I lived on the West Coast, all of the children were issued dog tags that we were supposed to wear.
Wow.
All the time. We had blackouts. We would hear a siren go off at night, and we know that that was a blackout. All the lights were supposed to go out so that, you know, if any enemy planes flew over, they wouldn't be able to see anything. My dad was a block warden, which meant that he had to check the houses in certain blocks and make sure that there was no light showing. In fact, there were no cars could even drive during a blackout. All the cars, if you were on the street, you had to pull over and park and turn out your lights. Then after that, we started having rationing. We were issued ration stamps for canned goods, for sugar, for shortening, for meat, for shoes, for gasoline. And
So everything was limited.
Right.
Because of the war effort.
Because of the war. Right.
So even baking a cake must have had planning.
We were vegetarians, so we didn't use our meat stamps, but my mother did a lot of canning of fruit in the summer, so she would trade her sugar stamps for the meat stamps.
Oh, that makes sense.
So she would have sugar
Yeah.
to do canning with.
I'm sure they were happy too, so that worked
They
out
were.
well.
And at that time, my brother was going to a boarding school, so his food stamps had to go over to his school, so anybody going to that boarding school had to have their food stamps so that they could buy food for the students.
So what was that like as a kid? Here you're 11 years old, you're wearing dog tags, and you've got all these, blackouts. Was that frightening?
It was a little, but it was just something we lived with. And I don't remember just how long all the rationing happened, but I do know that we were still had gas rationing when we moved to Lake County, because being on a ranch, if you had a tractor, you would get R stamps for ranch,
Oh, I see.
and then you'd have other stamps for your
Regular driving.
regular driving.
Mhm.
And I remember, since we had lived down in the Bay Area, we were kind of used to doing shopping in San Francisco. Well, one time my dad, my brother and I drove down to San Francisco to do whatever, and on the way home we realized that we didn't have very much gas, and he didn't have any ration stamps with him. I don't know why, because he was usually very meticulous, but I can remember going up over Mount St. Helena that he'd drive up a hill and then coast down and drive
Oh
up
my gosh.
and then
And you're
coast
just
down
hoping you don't run out
to
again.
because he thought, well, if we get to Middletown, I might be able to get some gas there, because he did business there, and there was only one gas station in Middletown, and by the time we got there it was closed. And I said, well, we'll just have to hope we make it home, and we did.
That's good.
But I was glad my mother wasn't with us, because she was a worrier, and
Yeah.
it would have been worrisome for her.
Yeah.
But I remember that very well.
Well, you were talking about how you heard about Pearl Harbor on the radio. There wasn't television, was there?
No.
So did you listen to the radio? Didn't they have programs and things?
We listened to the radio for news. And
Mhm. Did they have other things? Did you listen to other stories or dramas?
well, they
or-
used to have one man's family. That was one that was on the radio.
And what did your radio look like?
Oh, it was a big thing.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And I remember when I bought my first portable radio was when I was teaching school, when I had finished 2 years of college.
Mhm.
That was when I bought
So you
my,
could actually, because these others were huge. It wasn't like you were-
right,
yeah.
big things.
Yeah. So I've got you have a story, I think, to talk about undergarments here.
Well, actually, it was my mother made a lot of my clothes, and in those days, flour came in cloth sacks, and they had prints.
Mm-hmm.
So she would make me my dresses, and then she would make bloomers to match. So it wasn't just the underwear; it was the dresses.
Oh
and
yeah, so they used some material from this. That was very practical, wasn't it?
It was.
So did it say flour on it, or were they?
No, no.
Oh, okay.
No,
It was just-
it was pretty. It had flowered prints on
Oh,
it.
that's nice. So people, you probably weren't the only ones that did that then.
Oh, no.
Everybody did it.
No, it was a common thing in those
That's
days.
smart. That's a smart way to utilize what you got, isn't it?
Right. But I had a cousin who was 2 or 3 years older, who lived in Bakersfield, and her dad had an automobile agency, and we always looked to him. Uncle Harry was the rich one in
Right.
the family, and she had store-bought clothes.
Ooh.
And when she would outgrow them, they would send them to me, so I did have some
Oh,
store-bought
that's
clothes.
nice. That's nice.
Because I got my cousin Dorian's clothes.
Uh-huh. That's helpful to have.
So
Somebody
that
would
was,
a
that
nice
was
hand-me-down.
special when I would get some of her clothes.
You mentioned earlier about that you had a doll collection. Do you have any favorites?
Well, I had this one doll, and I don't even remember now what the doll looked like, but I couldn't decide what to call it, what to name that doll. And my mother said, oh, color Hepzibah. Well, I had never heard the name Hepzibah, but it happens that it's a Bible name.
Okay.
It is. So I named my doll Hepzibah. And I've seen it a few times since then. And that was one of the dolls that was destroyed. But
Yeah. That's a cool name, though. I can see this little girl calling her, "Come, let's go, Hepzibah."
I remember they had, when I was little, they had these, what did they call them, diety dolls or something, that you could put a diaper on them and they put a bottle in their mouth and then the water would come through and then they'd wet
Did
their
you change
diaper.
the diaper? Right?
Yes, and I had one of those, and I had all kinds of dolls. But in some ways, I was kind of a tomboy, because since I didn't have a sister, I always wanted a sister, but I never got one. And so I would play with my brother, and he would climb trees, and he had a go-kart, and he would play with his cars, so I did a lot of that too.
That's nice.
So
You got to have both aspects of that, right?
right.
You park Hepzibah next to your go-kart.
I remember one time I got in the go-kart and there was a nail or something and I tore my dress on it. My mother wasn't very happy about that.
So I wanted to ask you how you got your name.
I was named for two of my mother's friends. Betty was the daughter of a good friend of my mother, and they called her Betty. I think her name was really Elizabeth, but she always went by Betty, and my name is Betty. And then the Jean was a high school friend, well, lifetime friend actually, but they became friends in high school. Only her name was really Virginia, but they called her Jeannie. And my mother's name was Cornelia, but they called her Keenie, so they were Keenie and Jeannie.
Oh, that's cute.
And so she named me Jean after her friend, who was really Virginia, but they went by Jean. So
That's cute.
So that's where I got my two names.
And I want to ask you about a trip you took across country. You took a trip across country with your family?
Yes.
Can you tell me about that?
Usually, after my dad had his business and all, we would spend the summer in Yosemite camping for a week or two, and my brother and my dad would do hiking, and I would hike some. My mother didn't. She had, her heart wasn't too good, and so she didn't hike. But we would camp, my brother and my father hiked up Half Dome. That was too much for me.
Yeah.
And one thing I remember about Yosemite especially was the fire falls at night. At night they would build a big fire up at Glacier Point, which was above the valley, the Yosemite Valley. Mm-hmm. And then at a certain time, a ranger down on the valley floor would holler, "Hello, Glacier." And then they would, from up above, they would holler down, "Hello, Camp Curry." That was where people would gather. And then they would say, "Are you ready?" And they would answer yes, and then they would say, "Let the fire fall." Then they would push those coals over the cliff from the fire,
wow.
Glacier Point. And
I bet that was beautiful.
it was beautiful, and they did that for many years. Now I forget whether it was a fire hazard. I forget why they discontinued it. I read somewhere why they discontinued it, but that was something we looked forward to.
I can't imagine. You were so lucky that you got to experience that. I bet
Right.
That was amazing.
But when I was 10, we decided to make a trip across country by car. My father did all the driving because my mother didn't get her driver's license until after we moved to Lake County. And we traveled in a Hupmobile.
A Hupmobile.
That was the car that we had.
Uh-huh.
We camped out. Once in a while, maybe once a week or so, we would stop at an auto court. That's what they were called in those days, and they would just be a group of cabins so we could get cleaned up. I can't remember ever eating in a restaurant, but we never went hungry, and it wasn't just my family. well, it was my family and a teacher who had taught me in 5th grade. She also taught me again in 6th grade, and she went with us on that trip. And so I remember we went to visit one of her relatives in Tennessee, and that's where I first remember seeing fireflies, lightning bugs, whatever.
Oh, you'd never seen them before.
Because we don't have those in
That's
California.
right. That's right.
And so that's where I remember seeing them. Then we went all the way back to New Jersey, because that's where my mother had family. And we went up in the Statue of Liberty and saw some things around in that area. And then I think it was probably on the way home, we went by Michigan and visited another relative of the teacher, and they lived on a farm, and I remember eating corn there from fresh corn, and I can remember how that was.
You were the perfect age for that. I bet, just appreciating everything and getting to see everything with new eyes. I bet that was nice.
Right. So
How long was that trip?
It was about a month.
That's what I'm thinking, because it must have, they didn't have the super highways, you were
No.
going on regular little roads.
And I remember my dad teasing the teacher and said, well, I don't know whether we're going to get back in time for school to start. But of course we did. When I was 14, and that's when I was away at school, I got a phone call, and from my parent, I guess they had called the people I was living with, and they told me when I came home from school that there had been a fire in our house, and so I just imagined that maybe something in the kitchen or something. And then they said the house burned down just before Thanksgiving vacation. My mother was teaching school, my dad was out taking care of the chickens, and an oil heater, I think, in the bedroom somehow exploded or something, and we lived several miles out of town, so by the time the fire trucks got there,
Well, that must have been really hard. Did you lose everything?
Yes, we lost everything. And I remember my dad, he was a great reader, and he had this big bookcase full of books, and all that was left was a pile of ashes.
Oh, that's sad.
But,
And I can't
so
help
when
it-
I came home for Thanksgiving vacation, by then my folks had gotten a small trailer to live in. But we spent vacation sifting through the ashes, looking to see if there was anything salvageable. I had a collection of dolls, all kinds of dolls, and on the front of the house was the living room and my bedroom, and there was rock. About halfway up was rock. Well, in order to fight the fire, they had pushed that rock in, so whatever was in my bedroom just got crushed. So I had all kinds of collections.
Yeah, dolls in those days, they had little china heads and things, didn't they?
I had a little collection of china. And
Oh gosh, that's so
all
hard.
broken.
And I can't imagine you being gone and hearing the news that everything in your room was gone. Oh, that's
Gone.
sad.
Yeah, it was devastating, but what do? You move on.
Right.
My folks, they lost everything too. There was one good thing, since my mother's family lived in New Jersey, whenever they'd take pictures, of course they were all black and whites in those days, of us children and whatever, she'd always mail some to her sister in New Jersey, who was
good.
a teacher and very organized. So she had albums
Oh, that's wonderful.
with all our pictures in
I
it.
can't help it, because that's one of the first things I thought, like all your memorabilia. I mean, dolls are memories, but pictures are irreplaceable.
Right.
Oh, how fortunate.
So she sent those, so I still have pictures. And then we had some things stored out in the garage. And the garage did not burn. They were able to save that. It was a few feet from the house, not real far, but far enough so that it didn't burn.
Good.
So I do have, like I said, I have these diaries that my dad
Oh, so
wrote,
those got
but
saved.
those were all stored in trunks out in the garage.
Oh, how lucky.
So
Oh.
they did not burn. And another thing about my dad, he was very artistic, and he would love to have been an artist, but he was colorblind. So he did some beautiful pencil drawings when he was in the service, and I have those. Fortunately, all those things were
That's
out in trunks, so they were saved. But my son was also colorblind because they say that that's something that are passed
Skips a generation?
through the mother
Uh-huh.
to the male
Okay. Interesting.
child. So
Mhm.
so I understand. My son can't see different things because I grew up with it. My dad was the same way.
Now tell me about your dad making a house or making.
Yes, I started to, but we got as far as our house being destroyed by fire.
Right.
Now that was a rented place, so my folks had bought property out of Lower Lake, probably 10 miles from where we were renting. But there were no buildings on it. There was a pear orchard and pears and prunes on there. So after the fire, we got a small trailer for them to stay in, and they moved it onto that property and built just a little kind of a one-room cabin they had. One end was the bedroom and the other end was the kitchen area, and then on the back side of it was the stanchion where they milked the cow.
Really?
So it was just kind of a little makeshift thing. And when I came home, I would stay in the little trailer that they lived in for a little while until they got that built. But then my dad hand dug a well on that property. I can't remember now just how deep it was.
That's
but deep
hard.
enough
That's
to-
a lot of work. Oh, gosh.
And he made adobe blocks. He made a form, made all the blocks, and built a 4-room house, I guess. There were 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a living room with a fireplace.
So he built the house as well. I mean, he literally built. He made
He did
the
it
blocks
himself,
for-
right. After I was in college, well, in fact, that last year, the year that I taught here in Placerville, I remember going home at Easter vacation, I guess it was, and I helped paint the kitchen, so it was still in
Is that house
progress.
still standing?
It's still standing the last I knew.
Oh, that's cool.
Yes. And of course, with the cement or adobe blocks, it was quite sturdy.
Yeah.
And he had chickens out there too. Before he even built the house, he built the big chicken house, and he would sell eggs to a store in Clear Lake Highlands was the town. He would go down to Middletown with his Jeep to get chicken feed. He was a busy man.
Now, did you help out on the farm?
In the summertime, my mother was teaching school still, and she would go to summer school in Santa Rosa, but I would help clean the eggs, pick up the eggs, pack them.
Now I've talked to other people who say they do not like working with chickens. What was your feeling on that? Did it bother you?
My dad would buy chicks, so he would have them from small, then he would have them pullets until they started laying, and then when they started laying, then he would put them in cages. So when they were pullets, and small, running around, yes, they would peck on if you had a sore or something on the leg,
Oh.
they'd peck on you.
And they got sharp little beaks too.
You're right. I mean, we even had to shovel
Yeah.
the manure out and spread it in the orchard, and then we had pears, and our property bordered on the main highway between well, people would come up from the Bay Area up to Clear Lake. So we had a little fruit stand out there, and I would sell pears and prunes and whatever we had there.
Okay, tell us about Camp Wawona. When did you first go there, and what was it like, and how much did it cost and everything?
Well, I first went there in the summer of 1940. I was 9 years old, and you were supposed to be 10 years old before you went to camp, or in the 5th grade. Well, I was 9, but I was going into the 5th grade, so that's why they let me go to camp then.
Oh, okay.
And it was $10 for 10 days. I remember I took 10 cents for offering and 10 cents for spending money. And
That's a lot of money.
it was a lot of money when you know it was $10 for 10 days.
Yes.
And the conference office at that time was in San Jose. About 6 o'clock in the morning, we would get on this truck. It was a flatbed truck, but it had side railings on it, and then it had boards across for seats, and then our baggage was in there too. And so there'd be a few of us would get on at San Jose, and it would be cold at 6 o'clock in the morning, but then we would go over to the valley, and I remember we'd stop at Chowchilla and pick up some kids there, and by then it was pretty hot, and we'd stop for Fresno, somewhere else, and they'd stop and buy. Some of the kids would have more money than I did. They'd buy ice cream cones or something.
They were nickel.
But I couldn't afford to buy anything. But it was an all-day trip from San Jose to Wawona. It would be late afternoon by the time we got to Wawona. And that first year, all there were to stand were tents. They would have one camp for the girls and then another one for the boys. And there would be 5 girls in a tent, and the counselors had another tent that they stayed in. But
So they didn't even sleep in the same tent with you?
no,
Oh, okay.
there would be a row of tents, and then I think behind would be one tent where the counselors stayed. For whatever reason, I remember the names of all 5 of us that were in the camp, in the tent that first year.
Wow.
The next year, they had cabins and with bunk beds, so there were more, and our counselor stayed in the cabins with us, but I don't remember the names of the...
So what were the names of your tent
Well,
mates?
I suppose one reason I remember is that 2 of them are still my friends, and one of them was Beatrice McPhee,
Wow.
who is now B. Copeland, has been my friend all through these years. Another was Willowdale Gerrans, who is now Willie Nelson, has been my friend all through these years. Another one was Lila Getman, and I knew her at PUC, but we were never close at all. And in fact, I think her husband, I forget his name now, I think he graduated from college in my class, but I can't remember his name. And then the other was Rachel Luna. And Rachel Luna, I never did know anything about her after that year. Our counselor was Mrs. Augard from San Francisco, and she had been a friend of my folks when my folks lived in San Francisco.
When you'd hear stories around the campfire, who would you hear at night?
Right, well, we heard Eric B. Hare would tell us stories, and he told this continued story about tales from the haunted pagoda.
Wow.
And he'd just get to a real interesting part, and then he'd say, all right, let's continue tomorrow night.
Well, that must have been really special to hear Eric B. Hare tell them in his animated voice and everything.
Well, it was, and we just sat on logs. We didn't have any benches or any seats or anything.
That's an animated voice with an English accent, wasn't it? He talked English.
Once upon a time, away up in the jungle where Mr. Stripes the tiger lives among the bamboos, and where Mr. Hiss the snake crawls among the grass, and where Mr. Chatter the monkey chatters among the treetops all day long, there was born a little baby boy with little pink fingers and little pink toes and the dearest little turned-up nose. His mother thought he was the sweetest little...
It was very special to hear him.
And was that your first year?
I think so.
And how many times did you go to Camp Wawona?
Well, I know I went there one more year because I remember being in the cabin, and I remember that Jean Colton,
That is the Amazon.
who was my counselor, and Daddy knew her because she lived out here at the ranch at one time. And her brother, Doug Colton, was at PUC when I was and graduated in my class from PUC. And I don't know what happened to Jean, but I do remember that we all had nicknames in the cabin that year. I think maybe Beatrice McPhee was also in the cabin that year. I don't remember that Willowdale was. She may have been. But I had long hair and I wore in braids at that time. And so my nickname was Everlasting Hair Comber.
Oh.
I wasn't very good at braiding my hair, and so it was usually a mess. But and I don't remember anybody else's nickname. But one thing about the summer camp in Wawona then didn't have a swimming pool. We had to walk down to the Merced River to take a bath.
Ooh, that was cold, wasn't it?
It was cold, but also the trail was dusty, and by the time we'd get back up to camp, we wouldn't be very clean. But
So they didn't even have showers?
no,
Okay.
that was the only way we had to bathe, and because all we had for bathrooms was outhouses.
Okay. And did they have running water in the kitchen or anywhere?
Well, I guess they did in the kitchen. We had to wash our own dishes. Remember that? I remember there would be benches out there with basins on them, and we had to wash our own dishes. And then we had different duties, camp duties, and one of them was to scrub the pots and pans in the kitchen. But it was quite a bit different than it is now.
Yes.
The reason I only went to summer camp as a counselor 2 years was because we moved to Lake County. Then I went to summer camp up here 1 year. About the time I graduated from academy, for 2 summers, I was a counselor at Wawona. And Willowdale Nelson also was a counselor there
Okay.
because she lived at Saratoga. So some of my friends and I were counselors. Nancy, I think Nancy was a counselor there, Nancy Larson.
So is that where you met her originally?
Nancy?
Yes.
No, I met her at PUC. She was going to PUC prep.
And how did she become your friend?
Well, she was going to PUC prep because her older sister, Gail, was going to college. And so she and Gail were both in the dorm. Well, then Gail decided to get married, and Nancy needed a roommate, and I knew Nancy because we had been going to academy together. So the next year, then I was her roommate because I had lived in the village the first 2 years. In my 3rd year, I was her roommate because Gail went home and married Irwin Walker.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. And then Nancy married Al Buller, and
Right.
we'd go visit them a lot down, where did they live? Lancaster? Or?
No, well, Freddie doesn't remember when they lived in Lake Tahoe because he was
No,
only a
okay.
baby then. But we used to go down and visit them at
Bakersfield, wasn't it?
Near Bakersfield, wasn't it?
near Bakersfield.
How long did your parents live till?
My father didn't quite make it to his 71st birthday. He got cancer, stomach cancer, and he had several surgeries, but
So he died pretty young then.
he died young. My mother was 8 years younger than my father, I believe. So she lived for 18 more years after he died. And it was quite an adjustment for her because he had been the one that took charge of everything.
Yeah.
And when he passed away, she didn't even know how to write a check. I had to help her with her banking and all, but I mean, she was a teacher and a college graduate, but my dad had just always taken care of
Yeah,
those
that's
things.
interesting, isn't it? Because that's just, they had that role and then they,
Right.
why would she want to? Why would she need to? Yeah.
But she adjusted, and like I say, she lived for 18 years as a widow, and in her later years she would go down to Yuma, Arizona for the winter, stay in a little trailer down there and drive back. Just before my dad died, he bought her a 69 Volkswagen Squareback. So she would have a good, it was brand new, and she took care of it, had it serviced regularly and used it. She would drive down by herself down to Yuma until about maybe the last time I drove down with her and then took a bus back. But she lived to be about 80 and a half. She got hepatitis somehow, I don't know how. She had always been, her last few years, so independent, I think she didn't want to be a burden on anyone. Because I went over to take care of her because she was still at Clear Lake. And I thought, I'll take care of her, I'll fix food for her and all, and she'll get better. But I think she had kind of given up because the doctor had told her, well, you might get better, but you probably, can't beat this. And she just wouldn't eat. And even though I try to feed her and all.
Are there things that you do now going, that's just like what my mom did?
Yes.
What kind of things are those?
Well, sometimes when I'm writing a check, I'll notice that I've made a letter just like hers, her writing, I think, oh, that's just like she made that letter, And then my dad, one of the things that he did was, I can't even remember what it's called now. But anyway, he analyzed handwriting. So he would tell me some things, well now, if you see this, that means that they have this quality and so forth. So I still remember a few of those things, and I'll see, somebody make a certain, their letters a certain way,
Yeah.
and oh yeah, that means such and such, those are things that my dad taught me.
Uh-huh.
Oh, and another thing, my dad was a great speller. And when we'd be traveling, he would entertain me, amuse me by teaching me to spell long words. And I remember, eucalyptus, that was one of them, and there were a few others. I can't remember. Even though he only went to the 9th grade, he
Didn't matter.
had big vocabulary and was a self-made man. My parents had a VW Combi bus, and they used it as a camper. They would travel around the United States, and they were into rock collecting. They had quite a rock collection. In fact, in their home where they lived when my father passed away, he had built a whole case for their rock collection, and then they had a heater stove in the corner, and he had made a platform for that of the different kind of rocks, and behind it also had the different kind of rocks that they had collected.
So they must have traveled a lot.
They did travel quite a bit, and in fact, in January of the year that my father passed away in September, they drove that bus clear down to southern Mexico where we were living at the time, because they wanted to see where we were living.
Nice.
And so that was the last trip they made with that. They worked a lot with young people. She mentioned the Pathfinders. They worked up at summer camps. My mother would teach crafts. My dad would run the camp store. They did that for many summers.
Oh, so your mom was handy with crafts? What kind of crafts did she do?
Oh, she made, what kind didn't she do? She made just lots of different things, and she also she did a lot of crocheting.
Mhm.
And in fact, I think for probably most of the grandchildren, she crocheted an Afghan.
Nice.
Because she would do that quite a bit. And when we would go to visit them, she had a drawer in a dresser that she would have put things that she knew that the grandchildren would enjoy. So they would always, when they went to visit, they would go to that drawer to see what Grandma had put in there for them.
Oh, lovely.
And then, like she mentioned, my dad would go visiting people and giving Bible studies. That was something he enjoyed, and he just had a nice way about him, so he wasn't pushy or anything, you know, that people enjoyed
the
talking to him. And I mentioned the 69 Squareback that he bought for my mother. Well, she drove that until she passed away. And my brother had already passed away, so I was the one that inherited that car. And I drove it until 5 or 6 years ago. And then it was getting kind of not too dependable. So one time when Linda came home, she says, well, I think we better get another car for you. But then my grandson, Benjamin Medina, our youngest daughter's son, loved that VW Squareback. And he is 6'4". But I said, Ben, you can have it. I don't need it anymore. And so his dad helped him have a new motor put in Sacramento. He came out and drove it to Southern California about 3 years ago where he was going to college. Then he and his sister drove it all the way back to Maine. And
That's great.
they had quite a few adventures doing that because being an old car, you know, it isn't going to run, and it was in June and they didn't know how to turn the heater off. I don't even know how they turned it on, but they melted some things in the car. But it's back in Maine now, but I have pictures of him hugging that car.
Nice.
He loves it. And
yeah, because it has all those memories tied with it too. That makes it extra special.
so my mother passed away before Ben was born, but he still loves that car.
What's it like for you to be a mom? I know that you inherited a couple of children first, and we're going to find out about how you met your husband and so forth. But just as far as motherhood, what was that like for you? Did you enjoy that, or was it because you didn't have any baby brothers and sisters to practice on?
No, I didn't.
But you also were an elementary school teacher, so I guess. But you hadn't been around infants much, had you? Because the children that came with the marriage were older, right?
Right. Yes, they were 5 and 8 when I first knew them. They, the older one turned 9 just before we were married, and the other one turned 6 shortly after. So no, I started with my own babies, but my husband had experience with babies.
That's
so
good. So you had some professional help there.
Right.
So was that something you enjoyed when they were little? You know, sometimes people, well, I enjoy more at this certain age. Was there a certain age that you liked better as far as raising your children?
Well, yes, I enjoyed when they were little. I nursed all my babies, and I remember my third one, Lanita, I thought, oh no, this is the last one, and it was hard to give up nursing here because there's something special, a bond when you nurse your children, and so that was, yes, I enjoyed them.
And I'm going to
ask. It was a challenge at times, of course. All children are.
Oh, of course. And just some general questions philosophically. How do you handle stressful situations? What works for you when you're in a stressful situation? How do you diffuse that stress?
Well, I've always been a person who looks on the positive side of things. I try not to dwell on negatives, and if I have a choice, I'll go to the positive.
What about people? What about people that are, like an obnoxious person in a Or like an obnoxious parent you had when you were teaching? There are a few of those, I'm sure.
Yes, I had
How do you handle those?
I had parents who would blame me because
Right.
their children weren't learning,
Mhm.
or yes, I had that kind, but somehow I don't know, I guess I was patient and I seemed to handle it.
Yeah. Do you have any advice to your great-great-grandchildren on just approaches to life?
Well, just look on the positive side of things. There used to be a song that was popular. Accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative.
You got to accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, latch on to the affirmative, don't mess with Mr. In Between. You got to spread joy up to the maximum, bring gloom down to the minimum, have faith or pandemonium, liable to walk upon the scene.
That was a popular song many years ago.
Yeah, that's a simple line, but it's pretty powerful when you think about it. Because you could do that for everything, right?
Right.
A lot of situations.
And I guess that's what I've tried to do, and it worked well for me.
Mm-hmm. Another question I like to ask is, in what ways do you feel you've been blessed in your life?
Well, I've been blessed by good parents who brought me up with a work ethic that I'm not afraid to work. I don't feel like it's demeaning or anything. It's just the way life should be, and and they also taught me to get along with people around me, to treat them the way I would want to be treated. I also feel like I've been blessed with my husband because of all the many good things he's done. I've been a good husband, a good father, and I've been blessed by my children because they have good professions and have made a difference with the people that they have come in contact with. And now my grandchildren are also doing great things, I think. So I've just been blessed, and friends, I have friends from long ago and then from now, that just many
That's great.
blessings.
Why should I feel
Mommy. When I think of your life, I think of my red blanket. Remember this? You're like my red blanket. I have such good memories of you. Well, when we would be riding in the car, and I would be laying on your nice soft lap, and you would cover me with this red blanket, and you'd be patting my head as you'd talk to Daddy and look at the map and tell him where to go. And I guess that's how I feel like your life has been. It's been like a blanket that covers all of us, and it's our favorite blanket. You're our favorite blanket. You're soft and you're warm, and you're that to everybody. As a teacher with all your students, I think you were their favorite, and your influence has been just so widespread, just like a blanket, and enveloping everybody and covering everybody. So Mommy, you're my warm, soft, red blanket and I'm gonna say this for Linda and Freddie and Ellen and Eileen and all your kids and grandkids, that you just cover us all with, maybe with security. Your security. I love you, Mommy.
Okay. That's the way.
Well, maybe you can rest now.
I'm happy now. I smoked smoke.
We didn't start one, but we might need one.
I think so.
Smoke is from your chainsaw.
Oh, I smell wood smoke. There's a little difference. It doesn't have peanut oil in it either. I'll have to tell Linda about that. Okay, let's have fire. Tell them about the peanut oil.
Well, we got a bunch of peanut oil, you know, over there. Well, Daddy, I guess, what did you empty one out in the
10 galones, yeah.
in the wood splitter?
Yeah.
No, the tractor.
I put it in the wood splitter. Hydraulic oil.
Hydraulic. But then he put some other oil in there and put that in the
No, I put gas in.
gas. Okay, gas in the AA. And then when he was driving the AA yesterday, I said, "You put peanut oil in there? I can smell it." He can smell it too.
Now we can have a fire. Well, I got the 330 back. Got the log down off the hill. Now I'm ready to celebrate Mother's Day. We're gonna have the photographer in there too.
There.
Kennesaw Allegri.
Okay.
Got our little chickie back.
Yeah.
Little chickadee has come home. Quería llegar a la casa que mañana.
Okay.
Quería oler aceite de cacahuatina, cacahuate.
He's now driven the AA, so he's driven all the vehicles and tractors and everything. That was the only one he hadn't driven since he broke his hip.
Which is a AA?
The big one. Old Ford.
¿Está caliente?
No. Smile. You're on camera.
Guess everybody settled in for the evening, huh?
I don't know, and the chickens aren't shut yet.
No, they weren't ready.
No, they weren't moving last night at 8 o'clock either. I went out. They were still out there, so I had to wait a while. Another 15 minutes.
Bienvenidos a Monmouth Cattle Farm.